The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of wealthy guests. It was the annual Whitmore Charity Gala, an event where the elite gathered to flaunt their generosity while secretly measuring each other's fortunes. At the center of it all stood Charles Whitmore, the billionaire tycoon known as much for his ruthless business acumen as his icy demeanor. Tonight, however, he wasn't alone. Beside him, in a carefully pressed suit, sat his 10-year-old son, Liam, his small fingers gripping the arms of his wheelchair, his bright eyes scanning the dancing crowd with a longing so deep it ached. Liam had cerebral palsy, a fact Charles had spent years trying to fix with the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, everything money could buy. But no amount of wealth could erase the way other children glanced at Liam, then quickly away, or how invitations to birthday parties never came. Charles had convinced himself that providing for his son was enough. Love, after all, was a luxury he'd never learned to give. Across the room, Amara Jefferson adjusted her black waitress uniform, her dark eyes missing nothing. She'd worked these galas for years, invisible to the wealthy guests who barely glanced at the staff. But she noticed Liam immediately. The way his face lit up when the orchestra played, how his fingers tapped weakly to the rhythm, how his father stood rigidly beside him, engrossed in a conversation with the CEO. Her chest tightened. She knew that look, the quiet hunger of a child left on the sidelines. Then something unexpected happened. The music slowed, a soft violin melody weaving through the room. Liam's breath hitched, and before she could stop herself, Amara was kneeling. Beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You want to dance, sweetheart?" Liam's eyes widened, hope and fear warring in them. I can't." Amara smiled, warm and sure. "Sure you can. Dancing's just moving how the music feels. Let's try." And then the impossible happened. With her steady hands supporting him, Liam stood, shaky, unsteady, but standing. The room seemed to hold its breath as Amara guided him forward, one painstaking step at a time, his face alight with a joy so pure it cut through the pretenses of the gala like a knife. But Charles Whitmore wasn't watching. Not yet. Because across the ballroom, a shadowy figure observed the scene, a knowing smirk playing on their lips. They'd been waiting for this moment, and the truth they carried would shatter everything. The music swelled, wrapping around Liam and Amara as they moved, slow, imperfect, but alive in a way that made the glittering crowd fade into the background. Liam's laughter, soft and breathless, was the only sound Charles Whitmore suddenly heard, cutting through his business conversation like a blade. He turned, his sharp gray eyes narrowing as they landed on his son, standing, swaying, his small hands clutching the waitress's shoulders like she was the only thing keeping him from floating away. Charles's breath caught. For years, doctors had told him Liam might never walk unassisted. For years, he'd buried himself in work, unable to face the guilt that came with every hopeful therapy that failed. But now, here was his son, dancing, his face lit with a joy Charles hadn't seen since before his wife's death. A fist of emotion tightened in his chest, but before he could move, a voice slithered into his ear. Remarkable, isn't it? How easily strangers give what fathers cannot. Charles stiffened. Beside him stood Victor Grayson, a rival investor with a reputation for digging up secrets and using them like weapons. His smirk was razor-thin. "You should thank that waitress, though I imagine you'd rather pay her to disappear." Charles's jaw clenched. "What do you want, Victor?" Victor's gaze flicked to Liam, then back, a slow, deliberate taunt. "Just observing. A Whitmore air, so fragile. And that girl, Amara, isn't it? Funny, she looks familiar." A cold dread prickled Charles's spine. He turned back to Liam and Amara, now the center of hushed attention. Guests whispered, some dabbing at tears, others snapping photos. But Charles saw only the way Amara's hands, though gentle, carried a quiet strength, the way she murmured encouragement to Liam, her voice low and soothing, too familiar. Then it hit him, the way she tilted her head, the curve of her smile, just like Elena. His dead wife's name was a ghost in his mind. Across the room, Amara felt the weight of his stare and glanced up. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them, something that made her grip Liam tighter. Because Amara hadn't just noticed Liam tonight. She'd been watching him for years, and she knew the truth. Charles had buried. The gala's applause for Liam's dance faded into a distant hum as Charles stood frozen, his mind racing with questions he couldn't voice. That waitress, Amara, had looked at him with something more than recognition. It was like she had been waiting for this moment, like she knew things she shouldn't. And the way she held Liam, the tenderness in her touch, it wasn't just kindness. It was something deeper, something personal. His pulse pounded as he watched her guide Liam back to his wheelchair, her hand lingering on his shoulder for a second too long, as if she couldn't bear to let go. Charles had spent his life reading people, spotting lies in boardrooms and backroom deals, and every instinct screamed that this woman was hiding something. But before he could confront her, Victor's voice slithered back into his ear, low and mocking. "You feel it too, don't you? That itch in the back of your mind? Like you've seen her before. Or maybe she's seen you." Charles turned sharply, but Victor was already melting into the crowd, leaving behind only the echo of his words and a sinking feeling in Charles's gut. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Pushing through the crowd, Charles finally reached Liam, who was still, beaming, his cheeks flushed with happiness. "Did you see me, Dad? I danced." The pure joy in his son's voice was a knife to Charles's heart. How long had it been since Liam had sounded this alive? But before he could respond, Amara straightened up, her dark eyes meeting his with an unsettling steadiness. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s maybe, but there was a quiet weariness in her gaze, the kind that came from years of carrying burdens too heavy for her age. "Your son's incredible," she said softly, but there was something beneath her words, something unspoken. Charles studied her face, the curve of her cheekbones, the way her lips pressed together when she was thinking, details that sent a jolt of unease through him. Why did she feel so familiar? He forced his voice steady. "Thank you for what you did. But I have to ask, have we met before?" Amara's expression didn't flicker, but her fingers tightened around the tray she held. "No, Mr. Whitmore, but I know who you are." There was weight in that sentence, a gravity that made the air between them thicken. Then Liam, oblivious to the tension, reached for Amara's hand. "Can we dance again? Please?" The raw hope in his voice shattered Charles's guarded composure. For the first time in years, his son was asking for something money couldn't buy, something only she had given him. Amara hesitated, her eyes darting to Charles as if seeking permission, and in that moment he made a decision. "If it's all right with you," he said stiffly, the words foreign on his tongue, "maybe you could join us for a moment." Privately, Amara's breath hitched, but she nodded. As she followed Charles toward a secluded balcony, Liam wheeled happily beside her, still buzzing with excitement. But Charles's mind was elsewhere, replaying Victor's taunts the way Amara had looked at him, like she was waiting for him to remember. The night air was cool against his skin as they stepped outside, the city lights stretching below them, like a sea of stars. Charles turned to face her, his voice low. "Who are you, really?" Amara met his gaze, and for the first time her calm facade cracked, just enough for him to see the storm beneath. "My name is Amara Jefferson," she said, slowly, as if testing the words. "But my mother called me Marie. Elena called me Marie. The name hit Charles like a physical blow. Marie, Elena's younger sister's child, the niece he had never met, the one who had disappeared after the accident. His blood ran cold. If this woman was who she claimed to be, then everything he thought he knew was a lie. And worse, she might know what really happened the night Elena died. The name Marie hung between them like a ghost dragged into the light, and Charles felt the balcony tilt beneath him, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and black as his mind clawed through years of buried memories. Elena had spoken of her sister's child only once, a whispered confession in the dark after too much wine. "She's gone, Charles, vanished, and I can't find her." He had dismissed it then, too consumed by mergers and stock prices to recognize the grief in his wife's voice. Now, standing before this woman, this stranger who carried Elena's smile in the curve of her lips, the past roared back with vicious clarity. His voice was rough, barely recognizable. Elena's niece died in a car accident. That's what the police report said. That's what her sister believed. Amara's eyes glistened, but her voice didn't waver. The accident was real. My mother did die that night, but I wasn't in the car. She took a step closer, the moonlight catching the silver chain around her neck, a locket Charles knew instantly. Elena had worn one just like it. "Your security team found me hiding in the garage after the funeral. I was 12, terrified, and you paid them to make me disappear." Charles recoiled as if struck. "That's not—" But the protest died in his throat. He had authorized payments back then, huge sums to discreetly handle family matters, but he'd been drowning in grief, signing papers without reading them, trusting his lawyers to clean up the mess. Had they lied? Had he? His pulse hammered as fragments of the past resurfaced. A frantic call from his head of security, a child's scream in the background, his own icy response. Handle it. He'd assumed they'd placed her with relatives, but the way Amar looked at him now, with a bitterness that could only come from years of abandonment, told him the truth. They hadn't helped her. They'd erased her. Liam, sensing the tension, tugged at Amara's sleeve. "Are you mad at my dad?" The innocent question shattered the silence, and Amara's expression softened as she crouched to his level. "No, sweetheart. We're just talking about old things." But Charles saw the way her hands trembled as she adjusted Liam's blanket. She'd spent her life in the shadows, and now here she was, serving champagne to the man who'd cast her out. Why? Revenge. Money. Then she met his gaze again, and the answer struck him with brutal simplicity. Liam. She'd been watching him, protecting him, the way no one had protected her. A shout from inside the ballroom snapped the moment. Victor's voice carried over the crowd, sharp with false cheer. "Ah, Charles! Hiding out here with the help?" He leaned against the balcony door, a champagne flute dangling from his fingers, his smile all teeth. "I was just telling the mayor about your remarkable waitress. How convenient that she appeared tonight." His gaze flicked to Amara, lingering, too long on her locket. Charles's blood turned to ice. Victor knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to weaponize it. And if he dug deeper, if he uncovered the real reason Elena had been searching for her niece before she died, the Whitmore empire would crumble under the scandal. Amara straightened, her voice low but fierce. "I should get back to work." She squeezed Liam's hand, then brushed past Charles, her shoulder grazing his, a fleeting contact that felt like a verdict. As the balcony door clicked shut behind her, Victor exhaled a laugh. "You always did have a type, Whitmore. First Elena, now this girl. Though I suppose blood is thicker than champagne." Charles moved before he could think, slamming Victor against the wall, his cufflinks scraping stone. "If you go near her, if you breathe a word about her—" Victor's grin never faded. "Or what? You'll ruin me, like you ruined them." somewhere. In the ballroom, a glass shattered. A woman gasped, and Charles realized too late that the entire party had gone silent, watching. The ballroom had become a frozen tableau, every guest holding their breath as Charles Whitmore, the unshakable titan of industry, stood with his fists clenched against Victor's throat, his usually impeccable composure shattered into something raw and dangerous. Victor, ever the provocateur, merely smirked, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for Charles. "Go ahead. Give them the show they're waiting for. Prove you're still the same man who buried his secrets instead of facing them." The words slithered under Charles's skin, but it was the sea of staring faces that finally made him step back, his pulse roaring in his ears. He had spent a lifetime controlling narratives, spinning scandals into triumphs. But this was a wildfire, and at the center of it all stood Amara, her back pressed against the serving cart, her face pale as she gripped Liam's wheelchair like an anchor. The boy's wide, confused eyes darted between the adults, his earlier joy replaced by fear that made Charles's chest ache. He had to fix this. Now. Smoothing his jacket with deliberate calm, Charles turned to the crowd, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man used to command. "My apologies for the disruption. An old disagreement got the better of us." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, then gestured to the orchestra. "Please, enjoy the music." The guests hesitated, hungry for drama but too polished to pry, for now. As murmurs resumed and the violins swelled, Charles seized Liam's chair, steering him away with one hand while his other snagged Amara's wrist. "We're leaving. Now." She tried to pull free, her voice a hissed warning. "Let go. You're making it worse." But Charles leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "You knew this would happen. You came here tonight for a reason. Was it just to watch me burn?" Amara's eyes flashed, but before she could retort, Liam whimpered, "Dad, you're hurting her." The words were a bucket of ice water. Charles released Amara instantly, but the damage was done. Victor was already across the room, phone in hand, snapping photos of the trio like a predator circling wounded prey. The private elevator to the penthouse seemed to take years. Silence choked the space between them, thick with unspoken accusations. Liam, trembling, reached for Amara's hand, his small fingers tangling with hers in a wordless plea for comfort. The gesture twisted something in Charles's gut. How had this stranger, this ghost from his past, become the only person his son trusted? The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal the penthouse's sweeping views of the city, a gilded cage Charles had built to keep the world out. Now it felt like a trap. Amara moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection fractured by the glass. "You still haven't asked the real question," she said quietly. "Why now? Why tonight?" Charles stiffened. "Enlighten me." She turned, the city lights painting her in gold and shadow. "Because today is Liam's birthday, and it's mine too." The air left Charles' lungs. July 12th. Elena had marked it in her calendar every year, even after her sister's death. Marie's birthday, a day for mourning, a day he'd deliberately ignored. Amara's voice cracked. "I just wanted to see him, to know he was okay. But then I saw you, how you treated him like another business deal, and I couldn't walk away." Charles's phone buzzed violently. A text from his PR chief lit up the screen. "Victor's leaking something to the press. Photos of you and a waitress. What the hell is happening?" Beneath it, a second message, this one from an unknown number, a single photo attachment. Charles tapped it, and his blood turned to ice. The image was decades old, grainy but unmistakable. Elena, standing on a rain-slicked street, her arms wrapped around a young girl, Amara, their faces streaked with tears. And scrawled across the bottom, in Elena's handwriting, "If anything happens to me, Protect her. Victor's next message followed like a gunshot. How much is the truth worth to you now, Charles? The weight of that photograph pressed down on Charles like a physical force. The image of Elena, alive, desperate, clinging to a child he'd failed, searing itself into his mind. His fingers trembled as he zoomed in on the handwritten plea. If anything happens to me, protect her. How had he never known this existed? How had Victor gotten his hands on it? The answer came with a sickening clarity. Elena must have hidden copies of her research, her private investigations into her sister's disappearance, and Victor, always lurking in the shadows of their lives, had found them. Now he was using them as a weapon. Charles's phone buzzed again, another message from Victor. She never stopped looking for the girl, Charles, even when you told her to let it go, even the night she died. The implication was a knife to the ribs. Amara was watching him, her dark eyes reflecting the city lights like twin flames. She didn't know about the photo, but she could read the horror on his face. What did he send you? She demanded, stepping closer. Liam, sensing the storm brewing, curled into himself, his small frame tense with confusion. Charles couldn't answer. His throat had closed around the truth, that Elena's death might not have been an accident, that the car crash the police had ruled a tragedy might have been something far darker, that he, in his grief and guilt, had ignored every warning sign. The penthouse door burst open before he could speak. Charles's head of security, Daniel, strode in, his face grim. "Sir, we have a problem. Reporters are downstairs. Victor Grayson just held an impromptu press conference in the lobby, claiming you've been hiding a family secret for years." His gaze flicked to Amara, then away, but the question was clear. Who is she? Charles's mind raced. Denying it would only fuel the fire. Admitting the truth would destroy Liam. There was only one play left: control the narrative before it controlled him. He turned to Amara, his voice low and urgent. "You want to protect Liam? Then listen carefully. Victor is about to tell the world that you're Elena's niece. That's the least damaging secret he has." Amara paled. "What are you talking about?" Charles hesitated, then forced the words out. Elena was investigating something before she died, something about Liam's birth. If Victor digs that up... Liam whimpered, his hands fluttering anxiously in his lap. "Dad, I'm scared." The sound shattered Amara's resolve. She dropped to her knees beside him, cupping his face. "Hey, no, look at me. You're safe, I promise." The tenderness in her voice, so like Elena's, cracked something open in Charles. Daniel cleared his throat. "Sir, the press. Tell them. I'll make a statement in 1 hour," Charles snapped, "and find out where Victor went. Now." As Daniel left, Charles yanked open a drawer, pulling out a faded manila envelope. Elena's private files, the ones he'd locked away after her death. He'd never had the courage to read them. Now, he had no choice. Amara stood, her voice shaking. "What aren't you telling me?" Charles met her gaze, his own filled with a dread he could no longer hide. "Elena believed Liam wasn't just my son. She believed he was yours too." The words hung in the air like a detonation waiting to happen. Amara staggered back. "What?" Liam looked between them, his small. The penthouse seemed to spin around them, the glittering city lights outside blurring into streaks of color as Amara clutched the back of a chair to steady herself. Liam, her son. The truth was impossible, and yet it explained everything. The way her chest had ached when she first saw him tonight. The way his laughter had stirred some long-buried instinct in her. The way Elena, in the few fragmented memories Amara had of her, had always looked at her with such desperate sorrow. Charles was already tearing through Elena's files, his movements frantic. She must have hidden the proof here. Medical records, DNA tests, something to explain why she believed this. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. Amara forced herself to breathe, to think. She'd spent her childhood in foster care after being ripped away from Elena's sister, her mother. She'd assumed her entire family was gone. But if Elena had discovered this... Liam's small hand touched her wrist. "Is it true?" His eyes, so much like her own, searched her face. Amara couldn't lie. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise, no matter what, I won't leave you." The words unlocked something inside her, a fierce, primal need to protect him at all costs. Charles suddenly went very still. Oh my God! He was staring at a faded hospital document, his face ashen. Elena wasn't just investigating. She knew. He thrust the paper toward Amara. It was a birth certificate. For Liam Charles Whitmore. But in the space for mother, instead of Elena's name, was written Marie Jefferson, Amara's birth name. And beside it, a stamp, surrogate carriage, agreement confidential. Amara's knees gave out. Memories crashed over her, a sterile room, men in suits, her Aunt Elena crying as she signed papers. She'd been barely 16, homeless after her mother's death, when a kind doctor had offered her money to donate eggs. She'd been desperate. She hadn't understood. Charles was shaking his head. Elena couldn't conceive. She must have used your eggs without telling me, and when she realized Liam had cerebral palsy, when she saw the signs and started digging, she discovered the truth. His voice broke. She was going to tell me the night she died. A deafening silence followed. Then Liam whispered, "So, you're my real mom?" Amara pulled him into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes. The elevator dinged. Victor's voice slithered into the room before the doors fully opened. Touching reunion, but I'm afraid the world will find it very interesting that Charles Whitmore's heir isn't his biological son at all. He stepped into the penthouse, camera phone raised, live streaming the scene. "Say hello to the voters, Charles, or should." "I say, goodbye." Charles moved like lightning. One moment, Victor was smirking. The next, Charles had him pinned against the wall, the phone clattering to the floor. "You knew," Charles snarled. "All these years, you knew Elena was murdered." Victor gasped for air but still managed to laugh. "Prove it." Amara suddenly lunged for the fallen phone, still live. She turned it toward Victor, her voice clear as a bell. "You just did." The screen showed thousands of viewers watching, recording, sharing. Victor's face drained of color. Charles released him, stepping back. As the reality hit, the truth was out, and Victor's empire of blackmail had just crumbled. In the chaos that followed, the police arriving, the press screaming questions, the whirlwind of scandal and redemption, only one thing mattered. Liam, clinging to Amara's hand, looked up at Charles with tentative hope. "Does this mean we're a family now?" Charles, for the first time in his life, had no strategy, no calculation, just the overwhelming need to hold on to the people he'd almost lost. He knelt beside them, his hand covering theirs. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "It does." Epilogue. 1 year later, the headlines had faded, but the changes remained. Victor was in prison, his crimes exposed. Charles had stepped back from his company to launch the Liam Whitmore Foundation, funding medical research and support for children with disabilities. And Amara, no longer a waitress but a student at one of the top physical therapy schools in the country, spent every weekend with Liam, teaching him to dance, to laugh, to live without fear. The first time Liam called her Mom, she cried for an hour. And Charles, watching them from the doorway, finally understood what Elena had been trying to tell him all along. Family isn't blood. It's love. Voice piercing the silence. "Does that mean Amara's my mom?"
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.